people that have gone out there against the mainstream media and said, you're going to call us racist? You're going to call us potential Timothy McVeighs? Fuck you. War.
Seductive. Quite sure he's right. Obsessionally neurotic. Pretty dangerous, in fact.
Let us never tolerate outrageous conspiracy theories.
You doubt your powers to convince him?
Say it! Say it!
All right, I'll say it.
Worse than that. What I'm afraid of is his power to convince me.
Reasonable.
War.
This is the end game.
All right, it is Wednesday, February 5th, 2025, the 17th day of the Golden Age. Welcome, everyone, to the Wednesday subscriber stream. Hopefully you're seeing me properly. I'm just trying to adapt to this new Rumble Studio offering from Rumble, and I hope that's going to work. They are trying to compete with YouTube, and we will see how that goes. I don't know if they will be successful with that or not, but we've been here with Rumble throughout all these many years, and I think that they're going to push it over the hill there, or over the top, or however you don't want to be over the hill because then you're just going downhill. But it seems like they're going to make it. Rumble Cloud is linked into Truth Social. All that's linked to Trump Media. Chris Pavlovsky, the CEO, seems to be in a good relationship with Elon Musk. So maybe this will be the solution. I hope it will. And if Rumble is able to provide people who try to tell the truth on an uncensored platform with a way to make a more comfortable living and shift some of the attention away from the people who make $1 million a week to lie to everybody, I think that that's probably a good thing. So I'm going to experiment a little bit with the platform, and hopefully that won't be too disruptive in the midst of what we are normally doing. I hope everyone is well. And let's go ahead and get into some of today's very important business. Let's start with Mike Benz on X, formerly Twitter. Everybody's aware that we're getting all sorts of information about USAID and various other government agencies and the corruption and where the money gets laundered to. And Mike Benz has been on all this stuff for a very long time, particularly when it comes to anything related to censorship issues. He said, I've been telling you guys forever that you've been living your whole life, I think it should say, in a carefully constructed USAID Truman Show, where none of the institutions you meet, from the media to public health to universities to NGOs to terrorists, are the institutions you think they are. So I think he probably could have used a bit of a proofread on that, but the point is quite clear and very well taken, and something we've been talking about for a long time. The Truman Show is a movie where Jim Carrey plays the character Truman, and he's essentially living his entire life on a film lot where all of the houses look like real houses, but real people don't live there. The real businesses, it's all just a simulated world built around Truman, who's the star of a reality show he doesn't know he's participating in. He begins to realize that his entire world is a fakery and then eventually wants to escape it. Burning Bright and I discussed this at length on Badlands Story Hour more than a year ago. It was probably one of the movies we would have done in the first 6 months of doing that show. And now we're 2 years in, I think. So it's all fake. And it's all fake for a reason. The major institutions in our society are involved in creating that false reality layer. This is something that if you've been listening to the show for any considerable amount of time, which I would suspect most of the paid subscribers have been, you'll understand that we've been talking about this forever. It's clear that the media, that the instruments of the way our reality is communicated to us, whether that's through movies, television, radio, media, the internet, social media, doesn't matter what. That's what's creating our world farther than we can see it with our own eyes. With our own direct experience, that is the limit of what our real world is. Everything beyond that is going to be hearsay in some measure, and so might our local experience be. But certainly everything that comes in from those regime-constructed channels is going to be beyond what your local reality can capture. It's going to be hearsay. And so they construct this false reality, and as long as everyone else believes in it, and when they want to actually check, they can have an experience mimicking that part of the false reality, well, then there's no reason to ever consider that the whole thing might be fake in a way that we've never realized. And so over the last few years, many of us have realized that. And it's initially horrifying. And then it reaches kind of this fever pitch where it's like, oh my God, I can't believe all this is happening. Wow, there's so much going on in this other world too. And that's what I would call like the action movie phase. We go from the horror genre to action movie, and then you get to rom-com, and now it's just slapstick comedy. But you go through those movie genres as you kind of realize all this, but people have a really hard time, and we talk about this often, saying that this or that element within a reality they know to be Truman Show-like is nonetheless real, and that it's happening for real and natural, spontaneous, organic reasons. And we need to get to the bottom of those reasons in order to understand the world and how to respond to these events, maybe figure out who's doing them and stop those people before they're able to do any more. When what we really need to learn to do is understand that's just a false reality. And when our collective belief in that false reality ends, the false reality layer simply collapses under the weight of its own bullshit, because there's actually nothing holding it up other than the culturally enforced collective belief, and however much we stick with that. And it's going to be a real interesting experience this weekend with the Super Bowl, because that is one of those cultural moments that's meant to get everybody back on the same page. Donald Trump is going to do an interview. Fox is broadcasting it. Donald Trump's going to do an interview with Brett Baer, and we'll see how that goes. I can't, the American public is in a different mind state now when it comes to Donald Trump and when it comes to Donald Trump versus pop culture. So it's going to be interesting to observe. I don't know if it's going to be interesting enough to observe directly by watching the game, but it'll be something. So the Truman Show upside down reality, let's see if we can detect any areas of that false reality today. I was going to say bullshit, but I didn't want to swear. Now I have. So first, before we get into much of that, though, I don't know where else to put this into the run of this show. So let's go for a just over the top total inversion within the false reality. And then we'll get into more of the day's events.
Nothing as it relates to lowering the high cost of living. At the same time, they are raiding the government, attempting to steal taxpayer money. That's what the situation at the Treasury Department is all about. We will introduce the Stop the Steal Act in short order to prevent unlawful access with respect to the Department of Treasury's payment system connected to people who are trying to steal personal, sensitive, and confidential information.
That's amazing, isn't it? So that is the so-called House Minority Leader, Hakeem Jeffries, and he just proposed the Stop the Steal Act. His goal is to make sure that Elon Musk can no longer have access to the Treasury. The narrative is that Elon is in there to steal everyone's information, all of their private data that they're not giving freely to all of their social media apps, which is everything, all their data. And then, of course, they want to cut government programs to pay for their tax cuts as billionaires, so they'll get extra money in their own personal pockets. This is what the Democrats have chosen to go with. I guess calling people racist isn't working anymore, even though Elon Musk did that Nazi salute at that inauguration party. Crazy, huh? Just doesn't work anymore. Weird. Stop the Steal Act. The original Stop the Steal, of course, was the info op to make the people who didn't believe that Joe Biden really received 81 million real lawful American votes look like they were all violent lunatics. The Stop the Steal thing was very strange. That was the info op portion of the very violent insurrection. Good guy info op, bad guy info op, hard to say. Infiltrated good guy info op, infiltrated bad guy info op, hard to say. We're just going to have to let the future be what it is, and maybe we'll learn one day, maybe we won't. But the point is, we have to judge the people based on whether or not they are being honest and whether they seem like they are moving in the direction of the good twin or moving in the direction of the evil twin. That's all we can do. And we're not always going to be right about it. So the Stop the Steal Act is meant to stop Elon Musk and Donald Trump from carrying out the public mandate given in overwhelming fashion by the American people. And as many people have pointed out online today, Donald Trump and Elon Musk were publicly aligned, and Elon had endorsed Trump and donated to him, quote unquote. And it was clear that Donald Trump was going to involve Elon Musk in the administration in some form, maybe even the Doge thing, talked about well in advance of the election. So at the time of the election, everybody knew that Elon was going to be involved in a project like this and that government was going to be dismantled. The deep state was going to be taken apart. The administrative state was going to be brought back to constitutional roots, or as close as you could get. So none of this is remotely surprising. They're saying that not only are they trying to steal the people's data and the people's money, Elon Musk is also unelected, despite the people understanding that he was part of the package when they went out and supported Donald Trump. It is a literal inversion of the people out there supporting Trump, accusing the communists of stealing an election. So Hakeem Jeffries just stole the slogan. Amazing. So they stole an election back in 2020. They're stealing the slogan right now. So two definite steals, and they are blaming Elon Musk for stealing data, stealing money, and I guess being unelected. So Elon Musk stole an election as well. Hey, who knows? Maybe, right? Let's see what some of the response to Elon was yesterday. And this stuff is just delightful. These are short clips. So I know that certain people will always have the reaction, I don't want to hear these people's voices. Yes, you do. It's hilarious.
The courts, in Congress, in the streets. Elon Musk is a Nazi nepo baby.
Wow. Okay. Ayanna Pressley was louder than I ever thought she could be. That clip blew me away. It didn't sound like that before. I mean, she's not an angry black woman. That's not why I'm putting this video up. She just called Elon Musk a Nazi nepo baby, I think. Let's hear it one more time, but in much lower volume.
See you in the courts, in Congress, in the streets. Elon Musk is a Nazi nepo baby.
She's going to see you in these streets. Wow. Promoting, I think that's called inciting an insurrection. Let's continue, because that wasn't the only insurrection that was incited yesterday. Here's Friar Cuck, Jamie Raskin, with his new do.
Are you willing to fight day and night, dawn and dusk, to fight Elon Musk and take our government back? My friends,
are you willing to fight dawn and dusk to fight back against Elon Musk? Kami thinks he's Shakespeare and shit. What in the world's happening? These people are insane. I mean, I love it. I love it. Don't get me wrong. I love it. These people are insane. What do we have here? Oh, yes. Oh, this is really something. Now, we're just going to do the start and the end of this because it's 2 minutes long. And the minute and 50 seconds after the first 5 and before the last 5, not worth it.
Every movement needs a scrappy little dyke, and I am that person.
Wow. All right, let's get closer to the end.
We know the people who have not let us in today, they are not thinking about us. They are only thinking of them. So here's what you need to do. I need each and every one of you to get in touch with your inner scrappy little dyke.
Yeah. Get in touch with your inner scrappy little dyke. Someone in the chat just said, has there been anyone inciting erections, as so many Democrats said over the years? And I think the scrappy little dyke has that taken care of. So the answer is no. And for the record, I knew probably 5 or 6 scrappy little dykes in Los Angeles who looked exactly like that woman. Amazing. One more from the Democrats' day of protest, in case you weren't intimidated and threatened to your core with those last 3 clips. Here is Chuck Schumer. I have no idea who the scrappy little dyke is, by the way. I mean, forever, that lady's only going to be scrappy little dyke. That was her 15 minutes of fame condensed down into 2. And I would guess that we will never see that character ever again.
with you in this fight, and we will win. 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 We won't rest. We won't rest. We won't rest. We won't rest. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Leader Schumer.
Can you imagine a scenario where you would be inspired by that? Can you imagine where a scenario where anyone watching that would be inspired by that? But the thing is, all the people watching that, they're live, involved in this whole process. Each and every one of them, party of false decorum. Each and every one of them, for sure, would go up to Chuck Schumer, shake his hand, take a picture with him for Instagram, and tell him that he was really inspiring. That's the party of false decorum for you. You will have no problem telling a lie like that just in service of maybe getting power and influence with Chuck Schumer if he likes you enough, or just making it seem like you have power and influence by appearing next to Chuck Schumer on social media. I wish I was wrong, but then again, I lived with these people for a very long time. I actually talked with an old friend of mine this morning from that whole life, and he was always kind of apolitical, but he was basically like, I hate super liberals now. I mean, apolitical, like on the liberal side, he just doesn't want to ever get in trouble about politics, like not in a conversation, not anything, just doesn't want anything to do with it. And so he doesn't pay attention to it, doesn't really know anything, thinks that the people on TV are probably at least mostly right. He cannot stand super liberals anymore, and was telling me that other people who were super liberals, no longer. They're all just kind of giving up. And he has said something that many people from Los Angeles have told me over the last few years, is that the people around them who were like that are all just silent now. They just don't talk about it anymore because it's pretty clear that they're wrong. Now they want out. Even if they still will support those things in a group of liberals, they're not going to be outspoken about it. So they've taken themselves out of the game, and that's good. It's not like everybody has to be involved. Silence is not, in fact, violence. And if you don't have any idea what's going on around you, it would be crazy to encourage other people to do whatever the most powerful people tell everybody to do, knowing that the powerful people have been exploiting everybody forever on purpose to their own detriment for their entire lives. So whatever the powerful people are doing, like, let's say just no, and no one who has no idea about any of it, just don't talk, right? That would never work in Hollywood. Never, never. Okay, so this is a tweet last night that Elon highlighted from a woman named Andrea James, who I'm not familiar with. Apparently, she's the chief financial officer of OCX. I guess maybe does tech stuff. I'm not sure. So she says, let's talk about what's happening in DC right now. Friends, have you ever been through a ZBB process? If not, let me give you my take. So in a corporation where expenses are out of control, you have to put the entire company through a zero-based budgeting process. It is one of the most painful things that people in a company experience. You basically have to justify every single expense. And you also cut a bunch and then only add back after you've gone through a proper ZBB cycle. The US government is going through a ZBB right now. And that is necessary because spending is out of control. In fact, we might even be bankrupt. Trump might even know that. He might have even put the country into bankruptcy because, of course, he knows what he's doing with the bankruptcy thing. And that's not a knock on Trump. It's part of doing business and knowing how to do business. The complexity is so vast that I expect it will take AI to decipher. And I believe AI is being applied to deciphering it. You cannot tell me that a government that accidentally wires hundreds of millions of dollars to the Taliban has its finances in order. Well, that may be true, but I can tell you you're being a bit of a normie, Andrea. That signals an underlying disaster. That signals bad stewardship of resources, and you can just leave the Taliban aside. In fact, it is a disaster. Over the last 20 fiscal years, the U.S. government has made $2.7 trillion, roughly, in improper payments, according to the U.S. Government Accountability Office. Trillion with a T. That financial management disaster was not caused by Elon Musk, and there's no painless way to clean it up. Elon is doing what any executive would do, walking into a giant mess. Use ZBB and then build back. And so she continues to explain how that process works. And I encourage you to read that if you like. I also posted it in my Telegram info stream, t.me/very reasonable. So you can find it there. You can go to that address on your browser. And if you have the app installed on your phone, it should take you there. Or just download Telegram Lite for your laptop or desktop or whatever. And it should then open up a window in the app. If you don't have Telegram, I think you're missing out on something kind of important. And also, I still think that there's probably more censorship to come. So to be committed to censored platforms, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, the rest, don't know. I've never thought that's wise. Some people have skated by the whole time and think it's just fine. I think all that stuff, knowing that you're on a censored platform, the intellectual kids table problem on Twitter, man, that's so reality distortive that I think it is not worth it, regardless of how much additional information you think you may be able to find on there. Let's continue. So along the lines of making sure that these budgets are being properly committed, that the appropriations are being properly committed in these budgets, I should say, and in reducing the size and scope of government and in causing the most massive freak out that anyone could ever imagine. Too much of a freak out to even focus on any given part of it. The freak out just moves so fast to something else. Donald Trump went from shutting down USAID to there being a considerable threat to shut down the Department of Education. Again, something that he was elected saying he would do and that the people are fully behind. I am at the point of thinking that public schools should not exist anymore. Trump is at the point of saying they should go back to the states, and that's obviously correct. If they didn't exist anymore at all, I think that better ideas would emerge quickly, or there may just be better ideas in one parent always being around until the kid's old enough. I don't know. Maybe that's not something everybody can do, and I totally understand that. But you have to kind of figure out what the guiding principle is. Like, what is our ideal outcome if there was nothing in the way, right? Let's get to only the principled ideal outcome rather than thinking about what is the best outcome we can reach given the circumstances. Like, if the circumstances weren't an issue, where would we want to go? If that's where we want to go, then we should focus on ways to build society that would guide it toward that without it being a top-down control. Like, what sort of values, morals, viewpoints would have to be changed to lead us in that direction? And then let's make the argument on those grounds, rather than just assuming that private schooling is the only possible solution to the problem of how to educate mature, responsible kids who can handle themselves in a world that's not what we were told it was. My schooling did not prepare me to handle life in the real world as it is. Or, you know, maybe it did until I was about 10. Something probably started changing in the late 80s, early 90s, maybe around the time that the head of the CIA, whose dad worked with the Nazis, became quote unquote president after wearing Ronald Reagan around for 8 years as a skin suit. Maybe it was around then. But I don't know if public education is the right idea. Donald Trump's thinking about getting rid of it. And so he was asked, why are you bringing in an education secretary if you're just going to shut down the department? And he discussed yesterday. We're going to go through various clips from this event and the Israel event, the Bibi Netanyahu event. So we're going to kind of cut back and forth. Here is Trump talking about Linda McMahon.
Linda McMahon to be the Education Department Secretary if you're going to get rid of the Education Department?
Because I told Linda, I hope you do a great job and put yourself out of a job. I want her to put herself out of a job. Education Department. So we're ranked number 40 out of 40 schools, right? we're ranked #1 in cost per pupil. So we spend more per pupil than any other country in the world, and we're ranked at the bottom of the list. We're ranked very badly. And what I want to do is let the states run schools. I believe strongly in school choice, but in addition to that, I want the states to run schools, and I want Linda to put herself out of a job.
So do you think that's something you can do with an executive order, or are you going to ask Congress to do it?
I'd like to be able to. Look, if I could give the schools back to Iowa and Idaho and Indiana and all these places that run properly, there's many of them. I think, so if you look at the list, Denmark, Sweden, Norway, believe it or not, China's doing very well on that list, a list of well-educated, where they run their school system well. You have a lot of countries, not surprising names. I think that if you moved our schools into some of these states that are really well-run states, they would be as good as Denmark and Norway and Sweden and some of the other states. And then you'd have the laggards, and you know who they are. I don't have to go to it, but you'd have the laggards, the same laggards that are laggards with everything else, including crime. But even them, you'll break it into systems. As an example, if you went to New York, you go to Westchester County, you go to Dutchess County, you go to Suffolk and Long Island and Nassau and Long Island. You have maybe 6 or 7 locations, and you have New York City, which would include the 5 boroughs. And I think even that would run much better than it does right now. Same thing with Los Angeles or California. You'd have Riverside, you'd break it up into 6 or 7, but most of them would be states, and you'd have one, like in Iowa, you give it to the state of Iowa, you give it to the state of Indiana, these are really well-run states. They don't have debt, they don't have problems, they don't have any crimes, relatively speaking, to speak of. And you would have education that would be the equivalent of Norway and Denmark and various other places that are at the top of the list. So we're at the bottom of the list, and we're the most expensive. We're at the top of the list when it comes to cost per pupil. We spend more money per pupil than any other nation in the world, and yet we're rated number 40. The last ratings came out, you saw them. So they talk about 40 countries. We're rated number 40. And I say that if we did this, we would go 20, 30 notches up. We could do great. And we would have some of the best districts in the world.
But are you looking to do that with an executive order, sir, or do you need to work with Congress?
Well, there are some people that say I could. I think I'd work with Congress. I think we'd have to work with the teachers union, because the teachers union is the only one that's opposed to it. Nobody else would want to hold it back. Look, we have to tell the teachers union, we're rated last in the world in education of the top 40. We're rated last. We were 38. Now we're 40. We went to 39. We went to 40. We're 37. But we're at 40 now. The thing just came out. That's under Biden. Remember that.
Secretary.
So the teachers unions, another public sector union, would be standing in the way. He thinks otherwise he could work it out with Congress. I don't know if that's true or not. But he doesn't think he needs Congress anyhow. And why would he need Congress anyhow? The Department of Education is not part of the legislative branch. The idea that Congress can set up an agency within the executive branch, which makes it automatically under the plenary authority and purview of the president, the idea that they could set something up under the president and then not allow the president to have any input as to how it's run or whether or not it's going to be in service while he's president is crazy. So there's no way that he would actually, if we have Supreme Court justices who care about the original Constitution, and I'm not 100% sure that we do, we might have to see the Supreme Court invalidated as well so that things can be evened out as they were supposed to be, rather than us seeing the Supreme Court as like the ultimate authority of everything. But if we have a good Supreme Court, then they would obviously rule that the president, as plenary authority of the executive branch, would have to be able to defund an agency of the executive branch if he thought that that agency was doing a terrible job or was unconstitutional. It's so crazy. It really is so crazy that we've gotten to a place where that could even be confusing. So I don't think he needs any help on that. He's saying that he wants Linda McMahon to work herself out of a job. Good. I hope she does it. That's what I suggested a few months ago about a lot of the people on the fantasy team. If they ever get into their positions, it should be to expose to the public exactly what was going on in that agency, in that department, in that institution, and then close the whole thing down. And maybe that's part of why Treasury is getting an early look. Scott Bessent gets immediately in there, and he kind of opens it up to Elon Musk, quote unquote. Elon Musk getting all this information for the very first time. The Defense Department contractor gets into the system, and finally they know what's going on. We talked about this a bit on Monday. I don't want to go all the way back into it, but of course they've had information for much longer. Twitter files came out a few years ago. Was that all the information from Twitter? Did Elon Musk open up Twitter's actual files and let the reporters report? No, that's not what happened. The reporters reported the Twitter files, which were stories about stories that had already been broadcast on Fox News, about TV characters in the info op. And so it was a prepackaged intelligence product given to these reporters, and they disseminated the stories. If you like that, fine. I don't like it. I think it might be a limited hangout, and probably is. Who knows? So I don't love that, but we can at least know where the information comes from. If you think that Trump has it all, like has all the data and all the records, then they have it all the time, because of course that's got to be somewhere. All the data goes somewhere. Sometimes it goes through many places and different pass-throughs, but it's going to be somewhere if they have it all. And so this stuff was known. They didn't just figure it out. Elon Musk didn't just get into the computers and figure out, oh, wait, USAID is funding color revolutions in media and censorship and health programs all around the world. I need to tell Donald Trump. Then he goes in and says, President, you'll never believe this. Of course, he's already been president before, and then there's the last 4 years, and one day we'll know. One day we'll know. And so there's no way that Donald Trump is just finding all of this out right now. There's no way it wasn't part of the agenda. So do we have to participate in the false reality created around the timeline relative to this event, right? And you can remove all judgment from it, whether it's good or bad or honest or dishonest, none of it matters. Put it aside for now. We know that this story is not being delivered on a proper timeline. And even Mike Benz said he's been talking about this for years. I know from personal experience that Mike Benz has been talking about it for years. And I know that it's come up countless times in the work of the truth community. It's come up a few times on this show. So none of it's new, except to some people. It's totally new to some people. Do we need to pretend this is all breaking news because it's new to them and they're saying it's new to us? Is it good that we just play along with it? I would say no in both cases. Say, yeah, Kami, I get it. This is what I've been trying to tell you. This is stuff we were talking about 3 years ago. Not to show them up, just to say there is a problem with the source of your information. When it is not directly lying to you to exploit you, it is hiding information from you that it delivers later. Information that would matter in your decision-making process, maybe in many aspects of your life. And if you knew that decision or you knew that information earlier, you would have made different decisions. If you made different decisions, maybe things would have turned out better for you. Maybe you would have been more prepared to deal with some of the jarring nature of what's happening now. All right. So it's important to recognize that we are being told these stories out of time. This information is known. To have it all known, or to have it all, means that it is all knowable already. And all of this stuff has been prepared. So when members are named to the fantasy team and Donald Trump says this person's going to be, like Harmeet Dillon is going to be, I think, head of the civil rights division at DOJ. Well, there shouldn't be a civil rights division at the DOJ. Okay. They shouldn't be investigating the American people for invented federal crimes that they classify as violating equal rights under the 14th Amendment. That shouldn't be a thing. So what would Harmeet Dillon's job be at the point at which that part of government has been removed? Well, that job wouldn't exist anymore. Donald Trump just described Linda McMahon in exactly that way. We've been talking about this for 3 months now. He's talking about her as going in there, getting done whatever tasks she has to quickly accomplish, if there are any. It is probably only a narrative task, much like the Doge thing. We've been talking about this for months. No one else was. They're going to relay the story to the public. And this is the vehicle. It goes from Donald Trump through Donald Trump's people out to the public. And then what was knowledge that only existed in the MAGA and some of the truth community, some of the Maha community, but MAGA, Q, devolution, etc., and Donald Trump and around, now that stuff goes wide to everybody through these channels. This will break down the walls, and when people begin reaching conclusions about what all this means, they will be moving back closer to the same page that we've been on for a number of years now. And that will feel very unifying in exactly the way we've talked about for years, which is plant your flag, stay at that flag, and other people will unify around that flag, because that flag is based on truth and the American values, American mythology, the Constitution. Regardless of its status with any of the other stuff we talk about, it is still recognized to be the law of the land. And when certain people believe that they are obeying all the laws all the time, and the people putting those laws in place don't even correspond and follow and abide by the laws that we believe everyone has agreed to, the simple form, man, that's the sort of thing that makes people really angry. And this is when that process hits full speed, but they got to arrive at that point. There's no point in us staying back or compromising any of those values or any of that knowledge. And now Donald Trump is just marching forward as projected. Okay. So he had another really interesting, and we'll get into some of the USAID stuff, another interesting segment. Both of the Trump meetings were very interesting. This sit down in the Oval Office was far more interesting than the thing with Bibi later on. Here he talks about USAID kickbacks and then goes into California and the bullet train as an example of government waste, fraud, and abuse.
Thank you, Star. On Elon Musk, how often are you talking to him? And have there been ideas that he's brought to you that you said, oh, no, wait a minute, this is going a little too far?
Well, many ideas, but look, he's done a great job. Look at all the fraud that he's found in this USAID. It's a disaster what the people, radical left lunatics, they have things that nobody would have even believed. The whole thing with $100 million spent on you know what, with money going to all sorts of groups that shouldn't deserve to get any money, with the money. I'd like to see what the kickbacks are. How much money has been kicked back? Who would spend that kind of money to some of the things that you read about and I read about and I see every night on the news and every morning when I read the papers? Who would spend money for that? I would say this, the people that got all that money, are they kicking it back to the people that gave it from government? No, that's, to me, very, very corrupt. The real question is, how much of a kickback has there been? And one of the things I want to investigate rapidly, because I've never seen anything to this extent, the train that's being built between Los Angeles and San Francisco is the worst managed project I think I've ever seen, and I've seen some of the worst. Billions and billions, hundreds of billions of dollars over budget. In fact, I read where you could take every single person that was going to go on the train and get the finest limousine service in the world and take them back and forth with limousines, and you'd have hundreds of billions of dollars left over. It is the worst thing, and we're going to start an investigation of that because it's not possible. I built for a living, and I build on time, on budget. It's impossible that something could cost that much. And now it's not even going to San Francisco, and it's not going to Los Angeles. They made it much shorter. We're going to start a big investigation on that because I've never seen anything like it. Nobody has ever seen anything like it, but they found great things. Look at the list of things. Maybe I'll do it tomorrow. I'll read off a list of 15 or 20 things that they found inside of the USAID. It has to be corrupt. Nobody could approve that. They could only approve that if they were getting kickbacks. You're talking about hundreds of millions of dollars.
And it sounds like you're going to wind down USAID.
It sounds like it. I mean, I think so. Yeah.
So when that happens, which part of the government?
Well, I could see Marco Rubio being in charge, State Department, because they're giving money to. I mean, some of the money is well spent, I guess, but much of it is really fraudulent.
So who's getting the kickbacks? Because much of the money spent is fraudulent. Are the people in government who are responsible for sending this money out getting some of it back? Is it all just being laundered? Is it just one massive global criminal enterprise where the politicians are just as much members of the mafia as the cartel kingpins are? The answer is yes. We don't like to think about that because, of course, these are fine, upstanding citizens. These are public servants at every level, except they're not public servants at every level. And good twin, evil twin applies. Everything is at least two things. It's not that all federal workers or politicians are necessarily bad. It's just that way too many of them are. And if the organizations aren't being kept in check by the good people at the organizations because they don't want to lose their jobs, well, this is where we get. We saw the same thing with COVID doctors. As for the kickbacks, we talk about how these politicians are not elected in the first place. Our elections are fake. We are seeing more every day the divide between these two layers of our government. One of them, the layer that exists on the foundation of the constitutional republic, if there is any layer of reality, and the other one that's totally false. None of these people are legitimately elected. What's going to happen when the public finds out that they were taking all of these kickbacks? Yes, in some sense, it's expected. You know, we've heard about Lindsey Graham being part of the, the International Republican Initiative or something like that, the IRI. I can't remember what the acronym stands for offhand. There's one of those on the right. There's one of them on the left, quote unquote. Obviously, it's a Uniparty. But these politicians are making money from these organizations, and everyone basically just shrugs because they know everybody's on the take. It's part of the understanding that allows it to just persist. The public knows it's all corrupt, and the public has shut down. They're just like, this is how it is. We just have to do our best to get by for ourselves. Are these people going to be punished? Well, only if everyone actually wants to see that. Otherwise, it's going to be very unlikely. Let's move forward. So we got news. This is yesterday from CBS. Hold for processing just a moment. I realized that a link I am going to need shortly is not where I thought it was. And when that happens, you know it's all going downhill quickly. Okay. We are much better positioned now. So CBS News from yesterday, USAID to put nearly all staff on leave Friday, overseas missions shuttering. Nearly all staff for the U.S. Agency for International Development, or USAID, will be placed on leave Friday night. The agency announced on its website Tuesday night. Earlier in the day, all overseas missions for USAID had been ordered to shut down and all staff recalled by Friday, multiple sources confirmed to CBS News. The statement notes that all direct hire personnel will be placed on leave with exceptions for those on mission critical functions, core leadership, and specially designated programs. Those considered exceptions will be notified by USAID leadership by 3 p.m. Eastern on Thursday, and further guidance on how to request an exception will be forthcoming, the email said. So we can leave that there. A lot of things are happening in this time period, and it's very important to keep that in mind. We are just getting all of it at once with distractions all over the place, especially the Super Bowl this weekend. It is my strong inclination, let's say, to believe that these dates have been, and I would assume that most of you agree with me on at least some of this, that these dates have been set in place for quite a while. And this February 6th marker tomorrow seems particularly interesting because that's the deadline to see how much of the federal workforce is going to take the resignation offer and get paid for 8 months to do nothing if that's what they want, and then move on with their life in the private sector. Or potentially we might see people do as their unions have commanded, try to stay at work, think that they're going to somehow beat the Trump administration, or maybe they have enough leverage to make it so that Donald Trump can't remove them. And that might be the first chapter of this probably ongoing saga that we will see begin tomorrow if they try to have the quote unquote resistance against Donald Trump and what he wants to do with the federal government. If they're going to stay in their jobs, maybe they're trying to call his bluff. They think he's bluffing. And then he has to actually fire thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of people potentially. Maybe they're just waiting for the last moment before they make their decision. Maybe some will want to be part of the resistance and some will just want to get on with their lives and not deal with it and think that maybe this is the best circumstance they could ever wish for. 8 months of getting paid to do nothing. So we shall see, but it seems like a significant date. And in terms of the breaking apart of these layers of government, if the federal workforce just suddenly drops out of all of these bureaucratic agencies within the administrative state, these agencies that shouldn't exist, the ones that the Supreme Court has stripped rulemaking power from, stripped the ability to investigate, prosecute, and then adjudicate quote unquote crimes or violations of their regulations. So the courts have already said this stuff can't happen. The agencies are going to be defunded and removed because they're not really constitutional in the first place. They also don't advance an America First agenda. They don't make sense within the budget. So we have a number of very practical reasons, in addition to the fact that they shouldn't exist and by law can't serve the functions that they were serving under the rule of the Uniparty, the deep state, the regime in our country. Tomorrow is going to be one of those inflection points potentially, I think, because when that deadline gets hit, then the next phase begins. And I don't know if the next phase is just, well, thank you for refusing the offer. Now, this agency, this agency, this agency, this agency are just done. And maybe some are just immediate sacrifices. If that tells the rest of the federal workforce that they've made a huge mistake, who knows what happens at that point? I don't want to go too deep into the speculation, but it feels like something significant is happening between now and Sunday. Just that Super Bowl, everybody's eyes on one thing. Donald Trump with an interview before the game while the nation is watching. All these people pro-Trump now, the Super Bowl parties and all of it. They have the big screen on in like 5 different rooms in the house. And there's just Donald Trump's mug, and you'll see who the mad liberals are. I don't know. I'm interested to see it happen. Everybody's going to get the same message from Donald Trump at the same time in a way that they probably haven't gotten since maybe the debate with Kamala. You can't imagine the whole country tuned in for the inauguration. They're seeing some headlines here and there about what the Trump administration is doing, but I don't know. I think we're entering a potentially a different phase here. And then the government shutdown begins becoming a thing in a month or so. A lot going on. Okay, let's continue. So USAID put this message out. This is actually their .gov site. And let me see if I can make this big enough. Oh, there we go. So we can actually see it on screen here. On Friday, February 7th, 2025 at 11:59 p.m., all USAID direct hire personnel will be placed on administrative leave globally with the exception of designated personnel. So that's basically what the CBS News article said. For USAID personnel currently posted outside the United States, the agency, in coordination with missions and the Department of State, is currently preparing a plan in accordance with all applicable requirements and laws under which the agency would arrange and pay for return travel to the United States within 30 days and provide for the termination of PSC and ISC contracts that are not determined to be essential. The agency will consider case-by-case exceptions and return travel extensions based on personal or family hardship, mobility, or safety concerns or other reasons, and blah, blah, blah. But basically, everybody who works for USAID around the world has been told to cease their projects and return home. We're going to go ahead and pay for your travel, but the programs are all getting cut. Everything the USAID was doing is now hanging in the balance. Let's go back to Monday. I just want to, before we go on, remind that USAID's key mission, international development, as it's called in global intelligence jargon, they're overthrowing governments of sovereign nations and then replacing those governments with their people, all of them bought off, and then flooding those countries with international donor and investment money to create businesses and a society that will never, ever be able to get the regime fully unwound and removed. And we can see how difficult it is here. They're talking about needing AI just to figure out all the elements of that government. So they're trying to overthrow sovereign nationalist governments, put globalists in place, and then fortify them through whatever money is needed. Then business investment follows, then the whole of society approach, then civil society, and then they've got their system entrenched everywhere. That is what USAID does. The person who writes the democracy playbook himself, Norm Eisen, had this to say in his new podcast with, I think her name's Jennifer Goldberg. And then his guest is Russia hoaxer attorney Andrew Weissman. It's kind of amazing.
2 quick points before we let you go, Andrew. One is full disclosure. New York Times just broke the story. It's not only incumbent on the men and women of the FBI to defend the law, but it is on all of us as Americans to stand behind them. And the Times just reported that together with my state Democracy Defenders Fund fellow board member, retired Judge Nancy Gertner, and the DC Attorney Mark Zaid, who often represents FBI agents, we've written a letter to Mr. Bove, the leadership of the FBI, reminding them not only of their moral duties, but their ethical and legal duties, and warning them of very severe consequences. I had the privilege of having an FBI field office, and when I was ambassador, and I was a regular visitor to Director Mueller, who really probably the greatest director ever of the FBI. One of the things he and I talked about is that FBI leadership is trained not just in law enforcement, but in democracy. And they go to the Holocaust Museum as part of that training. And they learn what happens when a democracy deteriorates. And I'm not making any comparison to that terrible event, but it is a reminder that they are guardians of our laws, of the American people, and of our democracy.
So I made the same point to Jen about that training, because and what it means to the Bureau that there is that training. But I will make an analogy, and I know it can be perilous and people can make it overblown. But I do think, with respect to lawyers in the system, when you look at the lawyers in autocratic regimes, there is a special and important role for lawyers to not be complicit, because everybody wants to look for what I'm doing is legal. And if you have lawyers who are not acting in good faith, who, to use a hackneyed phrase, is bend the knee, that is how you sort of get to those kinds of regimes. And so in our profession, there is a special obligation for people to really be faithful to the law and the Constitution.
What system do you think he's talking about? Isn't it weird that it sounds like he's saying there's a legal system that rests on top of the Constitution, and every lawyer has a responsibility to be faithful to that system? And he says that it's because these people are autocrats. And so I guess the assumption is that autocrats are the ones trying to overthrow the Constitution. Senator Mike Lee made the point on X, formerly Twitter, yesterday that Donald Trump is apparently the only fascist who's trying to drastically reduce the size and scope of government and his own power. Doesn't even make sense. They were threatening Emil Bove. That's the name that Norm Eisen mentioned. He is the, I think, deputy, the acting deputy assistant attorney general. I think that's what it is at the Department of Justice. So they're worried about going after the DOJ and the FBI. They're worried that the Trump administration has their hands on all the critical information about what people like Norm Eisen and Andrew Weissman and all of the color revolutionists in the regime here in the U.S. have been doing over all these many years. And now they're threatening lawyers that if the lawyers don't support the regime's agenda, if they even think about working for people who aren't supporting the regime's agenda, anyone who is anti-regime, whether or not it's lawful, whether or not it corresponds to the Constitution, well, they're putting themselves in danger. What's the danger? Well, they're going to have their law licenses taken away by the bar. Well, what's the bar then? If it's acting on behalf of the foreign occupation and they're willing to disbar anyone who works against the foreign occupation. That's the threat they're making there very, very clearly. It's honestly amazing. It's good that they are. It's strange that they're so confident, but it's good that they're so honest. At least with each other. Associated Press, while we're on the topic of color revolutions, thousands protest Trump administration policies in cities across the U.S. And so this is just today. Now, I don't live in a city, so I don't know what's going on in cities today. Maybe some of you do. This is a very carefully arranged picture. This is, I guess, masky, supposed to be the opposite image of the ones that were shoved down our throats for the last 4 years. You see the Capitol there in the background. This here is not an insurrection. This is a very peaceful protest on behalf of USAID. USAID saves lives. Maybe those lives matter. De-Tusk Musk, not USAID. First, they came for USAID. Supposed to harken back to first they came for the socialists and I said nothing. Hey, you people right here in this picture, you're the Nazis. We don't have to spend any time on this, but one last color revolution for old times' sake, before the funding for USAID is gone forever. Let's stick with the USAID topic. This is Zero Hedge putting together just a wonderful collection of all the narrative pieces about this USAID thing. I thought we would have a picture loading here. Maybe one day we will. So there we are. Zero Hedge. The headline is Politico propped up by millions of dollars from the U.S. government. And it turns out it's not just Politico. This is Caroline Levitt yesterday. I can confirm that the more than $8 million taxpayer money that have gone to essentially subsidizing subscriptions to Politico will no longer be happening. The Doge team is working on canceling those payments now. I'm sure it's all just been discovered that Politico was making all of this money. Max Tanney, I think he used to be at The Intercept. Maybe he still is, but liberal regardless. Staff at Politico did not get paid for the latest pay period. The company just sent several emails to employees saying it believes there was a technical issue, a technical error, and is now looking into how to fix the issue. And so they were saying that despite the fact that they couldn't pay their payroll, it was just a technical issue with payroll. And to be fair, it totally might be, or it might be that they're being defunded now that USAID is no longer pumping money through Politico, as they were during with other media outlets and during the past administration and others. Another account, Pacheco the Ghost, following up. I found $27 million during the Biden years, subscription services to Politico. Elon Musk points out that it's odd that $500,000, nearly $500,000, was spent on 37 Politico Pro subscriptions. Apparently, those are $10,000 subscriptions. So, Chris Tomlinson commenting, whoops, took me off the page, that Politico should be more transparent about how many of these pro subscriptions are being government funded. That's an extraordinary amount of money. If there is a need for that many pro subscriptions, there's already a problem there. Politico was sold in 2021 to media giant Axel Springer, a German company that also owns Business Insider, for $1 billion. So then, post that point, once it's a German-owned news company, you have U.S. money flowing into a German-owned news company. 90% of subscribers to left-wing publications like Politico are fake and taxpayer funded. And then using fake subs to artificially pump revenue, Politico gets to sell itself to German propaganda giant Axel Springer for $1 billion. And so this is the Tyler Durden character, Zero Hedge, suggesting that all that money's coming in, making it look like they're a very profitable company, probably has something to do with their valuation, even though a lot of that money's coming in directly from the U.S. government and not an actual subscriber base of people who are paying for these subscriptions. He goes on, it's not just the subscriptions. There are huge ad contracts, dinner parties. DC throws itself under the guise of media conferences, sponsorships, etc., all paid for by taxpayers. Once done with Politico, look at its spawn, Axios, founded by Politico veterans. And of course, Axios is one of those news organizations that's being considered the new media in the new White House press briefing room, as Caroline Levitt noted last week. Also pointing out here, funding goes to the New York Times and to the BBC as well. And then Ian Miles Chong, that unfortunate person, posted over on X, formerly Twitter, just how much the New York Times is actually getting. And Elon Musk reposted him. The U.S. government gave the New York Times tens of millions of dollars over just the past 5 years, despite paying relatively little money to the New York Times in the years preceding 2021. For instance, in August 2024, the U.S. government awarded $4.1 million to the New York Times. The bulk of the funds came from the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services at $26.9 million, followed by the National Science Foundation at $19.15 million. Man, sounds like they were paying for COVID information. I mean, that's just a conspiracy theory. But Health and Human Services and the science paying for media companies? That can't be good. That can't be good. Speaking of Health and Human Services, it was reported today, and we'll find out how true it is in the future, that member of the fantasy team, Robert F. Kennedy Jr., the potential Secretary of Health and Human Services, hopefully with the same job as Linda McMahon, in which case I'm all good with it, right? Don't hate RFK Jr. I was probably the first person to suggest that he be made vice president back in February 2022. So, or maybe it was 2023, whenever it was, doesn't matter. I'm just trying to reiterate that I do not have any ill will toward this man. I'm just going to judge him in the same way I judge these other characters. He apparently has made all sorts of compromises with Senator Bill Cassidy to earn Cassidy's vote. Our very real senators are going to cast very real votes to decide whether or not they are allowed to have this sort of check and balance on the Trump administration. And maybe RFK Jr. will be the one that doesn't get it. And that'll mean that we get to have the battle in the courts and in the court of public opinion, more importantly, over whether or not Trump can have the fantasy team, even if the Senate decides not to confirm these people. And throwing another wrench into the gears, Cocaine Mitch, Glitch McConnell himself, fell down the stairs again. So the dude is on the injured list more than like Lonzo Ball. And if you are an NBA fan, you'll know. Or how about this? Let's go old school. Bill Walton, whose career was ended early from injury. Mitch McConnell is injured all the time, just getting injured all the time. Today, we were told he was pulled up, picked up, carried by Steve Daines and Mark Wayne Mullen. All that sounds like comms to me. I don't know what exactly is being communicated. Maybe those are the guys supporting Mitch in the Senate. These are the still hidden rhinos. I don't know. But an interesting story. And so if Mitch can't show up to cast his very real votes in the very legitimate Senate, maybe the compromise with Bill Cassidy isn't going to get us there. Because he basically, the Cassidy demand was that RFK Jr. would be checking in all the time and the CDC could still give their vaccine information. No one was going to be encouraged not to take vaccines. Basically, Bill Cassidy protecting the vaccine regime. And the condition for RFK Jr. winning his vote is that RFK Jr. promised to meet all his demands. Maybe that is totally and completely fake news. Got to remember that it might just be fake news, or maybe it's real. Maybe he's doing it for leverage. Maybe he's allowing Bill Cassidy to be exposed as pro-vaccine. I don't know what the answers are. I just try to put out all the different possibilities. And we have to be especially careful when there is a person of great power and wealth, especially one with the Kennedy last name, that much power and wealth, who is asking us for power through our representatives who are already illegitimate themselves, needing their votes and then lying to everyone in order to win their votes. That is not a tenable situation for the future, which means it's a situation that we should recognize now, whether or not there's another explanation that we are not privy to. And it's that simple. At least it is for me. Okay, where was I? So yesterday, while all of this USAID story was developing, none other than Politico themselves put out this article. Let's get all the way back up to the top here. What Elon Musk said is a bold-faced lie. A former Republican director of USAID says the agency is critical to U.S. interests and can't be abolished or folded into the State Department. They've just got to remain an independent agency that can be run by foreign powers. Andrew Natsios, who ran USAID under President George W. Bush. Why don't they say former President George W. Bush? They always made sure to let us know it was former President Donald Trump. And as a lifelong conservative, calls such moves illegal and outrageous. What Musk and Rubio are doing is criminal. He said they can't abolish the aid program without a vote from Congress. Moreover, Natsios says they missed the point that USAID is critical to winning the competition with China and reflects long-standing Republican priorities. George W. Bush's dad opened the world up for China. And that's why we have cheap goods made with foreign slave labor, and our manufacturing economy has died. But yes, we're in. Tell us more about the competition we're in with China, Mr. Natsios. It's just 1% of the federal budget, right? Says Natsios, who also played a leading role in building World Vision, the largest Christian non-governmental organization in the world with programs in 103 countries. And I would suggest to everybody that if you don't like it when there are corrupt Christian organizations, maybe it's time to look into World Vision and the programs they're running in 103 different countries. This guy sounds globalist as heck. Heck. And it builds goodwill and political influence and economic influence. It promotes American business. It protects us in terms of disease threats around the world. It is in our national interest to run these programs. And so the idea is that once these countries are overthrown, their governments, who are totally just puppet governments propped up and maintained by our CIA and through non-kinetic means and less subversive means, I guess apparently, not really, I don't think, through the USAID, when we have puppet governments, they can work in our interest, in our benefit, to our benefit. So that's why we need them. And sure, our benefit is only described as our alignment with the global regime's agenda and as it is in these other countries. So we're implementing the most immoral possible worldview in all of these countries, trying to take over the whole world to run it as one thing, but it's in our national interest. Natsios now teaches at the Bush School of Government and Public Service at Texas A&M. So he probably has a wonderful salary for that position. Also noteworthy here, Natsios was instrumental in launching one of the most successful programs in USAID history, the President's Emergency Plan for AIDS Relief, or PEPFAR, which has saved some 25 million lives since 2003, blah, blah, blah. That's the organization we discussed last week that Robert F. Kennedy Jr. agreed with Bill Cassidy is doing great work on AIDS in Africa and has saved 25 million lives through from a disease, that was essentially on par with COVID and may well be a product of the medical experiments they've been running on Africans for decades that Robert F. Kennedy Jr. knows about and wrote about in his book, The Real Anthony Fauci. So this guy Natsios started that program under USAID. So USAID starts PEPFAR. Bill Cassidy asks Robert F. Kennedy if he likes PEPFAR, or maybe it was Cornyn who asked him, just to be clear. Don't want to be wrong about that. Could be. Asks Robert F. Kennedy if that's a good program, and Robert F. Kennedy agrees that it is. Maybe that's the one good program USAID is running. Except it's not. Isn't that crazy? So they're having an interview, and I just want to highlight a few pieces of this interview. These are comments by this Natsios character. He says, because it gives us influence around the world, this being USAID, it's in our national interest. For example, we have a disease reporting system that is in 90 countries. It allows us to monitor what's going on locally. Do you want disease to get to the United States? A new epidemic. You got that? So if you cut off USAID, then we're going to get COVID. He says the reason we didn't know about COVID-19 in time was because there's no aid mission in China. Then he immediately goes on to say that he's not saying that there should be one, but just, if there was, we could have prevented COVID, which is why we need aid programs in all these other countries, just not China. Now, why can't they have a USAID program in China? The answer is because they're not allowed. Because China wouldn't have that. And Russia, same thing. They tried to prop up Alexei Navalny as the opposition candidate. They tried to run the color revolution playbook in Russia. It didn't work. The color revolutionists are always the bad guys. We should get on the same page about that. And so if the color revolutionists are saying we are not allowed in China and we don't want to be in China, and of course they want to be everywhere. If they can't be somewhere, they're going to say they didn't want to be in that place in the first place. It's like not getting invited to prom. If you're not invited to prom, you say you didn't really want to go to prom. What would you say to the American people who are being told USAID is a worthless organization that doesn't add anything to their lives? He says, I'm tired of listening to that argument. It's just 1% of the federal budget. Just give us our $40 billion. It's just 1%. We're not the problem. We can't be the problem no matter how many governments we overthrow, and no matter how much propaganda we push out into the world, and no matter how many people we censor, no matter how many people we vaccinate. Gosh, man, it's only 1% of the budget. He says it builds goodwill and political influence and economic influence. It promotes American business. It protects us in terms of disease threats around the world. It is in our national interest to run these programs. Also, we don't want a large number of people to starve to death because it's destabilizing and frankly intolerable from an ethical point of view. And the polling data, by the way, shows that the great majority of the American people, when you specify what the program is, they support it. So if you were to do a poll and you were to go up and say to some American, hey, do you want African kids to die of AIDS? And they say no, well, then you support PEPFAR in terms of the way these people view these sorts of things. But consider the threats here. Disease, war, famine, starvation. If you don't support USAID, then you support all those things. You are trying to kill someone's grandma. You got to wear 2 masks, stand at least 6 feet away from each other in the store, and support USAID. Otherwise, you're going to kill someone's grandma. And you also need to get vaccinated. So vaccinated, 2 masks in the car, 25 feet away in the store, and support USAID forever, or else you've killed someone's grandma. And we're probably compromising national security as well. I also want to highlight this part. Just listen to these countries and think about what's going on in these countries that actually matters a whole lot. Okay. And he mentioned Sub-Saharan Africa here. He mentions India. These are places that they've wanted to have missions. They closed an aid mission in Panama and China moved in, right? Incredible. They closed the aid mission in Panama and China moved right in. Who just moved out to turn control of the Panama Canal back to the United States of America? Well, that's China. Okay. We're told that Panama has had control of it this whole time. Trump says it's actually China. When USAID pulled out of Panama, China moved in. If USAID is virtually indistinguishable from the CIA, and all of this is how they infiltrate and overthrow and then maintain their proxy states around the world through their puppet governments, the evil twin faction in any given country, that's removed, China moves in. Here in Panama. And Donald Trump just says some things and makes some jokes online. And China's like, okay, President Trump, you can have it back. And then they're out of there. So who actually left? What is the critical leaving in this situation? I would suggest that it's USAID. He says we need to focus on the geography of our aid programs, where our missions are and whether they're critically important to the national interest of the United States. We should always have a mission in Egypt. Well, what's in Egypt? The Suez Canal is in Egypt. That's a lot like the Panama Canal. And what do they need to do with the Suez Canal? Well, they need to control a major choke point in global trade, just like they do in Panama. And we're going to get to more of this later. But flat out, USAID should always have a mission in Egypt. We should always have a mission in Panama. We should always have a mission in Morocco because of the Straits of Gibraltar. These are critical transportation routes, and they affect global food security because the global food system relies on these choke points in order to deliver food. So that's the USAID wanting to have missions in these countries so that they can control the choke points. This was written yesterday. This is what we've been talking about for a while now, and certainly repeatedly when it comes to Greenland and Canada and the Panama Canal. Why? For exactly this reason, that the guy who used to run USAID for the Bush administration is telling us in absolutely explicit terms. I was like, did they write this article for me? So I don't think we should be graduating countries unless they become as rich as South Korea or Taiwan, which we once had massive aid programs for, but we can't justify any longer. And he's saying that in those cases, it's because they're more mature states and everything is stabilized there. Those are world hotspots. Is China going to kick USAID out of South Korea and Taiwan? Maybe, but maybe they don't have to, because just like China was down here in Panama, the US was over there in Taiwan and South Korea. So all Donald Trump has to do is withdraw from those places, which I think we'll probably see sooner or later after various other dramas get settled. And Little Rocket Man is probably lower in I shouldn't say lower in the list of priorities. I don't want to be disrespectful to Little Rocket Man hanging out with his hot tub monkeys. That's going to come later, because you can't just go, hey, Kim Jong-un's actually our friend on all of them. But South Korea and Taiwan, that'll be the same situation. So they're listing all of these various regime proxy states around the world and fretting that they're being kicked out because they're not going to have control over choke points of international trade. This is how you take the world over. If you can't control the choke points of international trade, then you can't have a worldwide boycott of a given country. And this was the method the regime used in Europe leading up to World War II. That's how they applied leverage to Germany and eventually leveraged the transfer agreement that would take the Uniparty right government and meshed with the sovereign nationalists, put them all into their cause, sold on the idea that your culture will be purified and be made better, and the economic hardships will stop if we can take these Jews down to Palestine and set up the proxy state of Israel. All that leverage came as a product of total media control, total financial control, control over resources, and control over trade routes. Because when you can control the trade routes, the resources, the finance, and the media, then waging a boycott against a country is, unless that country is able to be self-sufficient and defend itself, like hopefully we are, then eventually they're going to have to relent to the demands because everything they need is controlled by someone else. That's the whole point of globalism. That's how they're able to control all the individual nodes that would otherwise have decentralized control. So the reing here is specifically about the choke points in international trade, because they can't keep the U.S., I guess, they can't destroy the U.S. economically the way that they could previously in a country like Venezuela, for instance. They can cut Venezuela off from many parts of the world. They can do that with some of these other proxy states. They could do it with the other superpowers when the superpowers weren't very strong, but they can't do it in any of the places now. That is how the regime becomes fully conquered and how you can get rid of them in all these countries. And we're well on the way to doing that, which is why I think it's important to continue illustrating these things, because it seems like these are the last chips to fall when it comes to the big picture really coming together. When the parallel system is fully turned on, and we are really getting to that point, and maybe it already is fully turned on. I'm always happy to later understand that I was much further behind than I thought I was. Okay. That awakening is going to come to me over and over again throughout my life, right? No matter what things I might be projecting or what directions I might be correct about, I'm still always going to be behind. All of us are always going to be behind. We're never going to be able to catch up fully to real time, but we can get on the right track about other things that are constants in our lives, like God, like moral objectivism or objective morality, however you want to think of that. Doesn't have to be a belief system necessarily. We can be going in the right direction on those things and then be honest about where the rest of our world maps onto those understandings, and still be wrong about our conclusions about the world, because so much of it is unknowable and we can never actually achieve catching all the way up into real time. And from that is our humility. We don't know everything. We don't really know anything. We can try to figure out what is not true, and we can try to pull ourselves back to the one path that allows us to interpret the rest of it, hopefully successfully, in the majority of cases. Like if we're batting better than 500, I think we're good. Like in Major League Baseball, if you're batting 300, you're a Hall of Famer. If we can be mostly right in a worldly way, while trying to correspond at all times to the more important way, I think that's probably a decent recipe. Maybe someone has a better idea in the chat. I need to pause for just a moment. Some subscriptions have come in, and thank you all very much. Crystal Anon, I think, has donated 6. And then, was it Snowcat earlier? Oh, no, it was... Sorry, I need to get the name. Oh, no. Have I lost it? It starts with an A and ends with a 73. Aussie Mix, I think is what it was. Yes, Aussie Mix 73. Thank you, everybody, for those subscriptions. And by the way, with the new Rumble model, I'm not encouraging anybody to get a subscription, by all means. I'm not encouraging anybody to spend any more money. I know that I am talking to my supporters right now, okay? So please understand that. If in the subscriber stream, everyone in there already has a subscription on the Substack, if someone puts up subscriptions like this for Rumble, grab them, because there's a creator program that Rumble is trying to start that I'm going to attempt to get involved with, if I can, that requires streams, private subscriber only streams on Rumble. Okay. And so if I'm able to do that at some point, it would be through the subscriptions of just Rumble only subscriptions. And I'll try to figure out, maybe I can start a locals channel and that will count. And then I can gift Substack subscribers locals subscriptions. And if that would work, then problem solved. I'm going to have to experiment with this system. But if those subscriptions are just hanging out in there today and you don't have one on Rumble, it's better to grab it than not grab it. So thank you, Crystal Anon. Thank you, Aussie Mix 73, not 777. What was I saying? Who knows what I was saying? Okay, so global choke points. It's amazing that that's just dropped in there by a USAID director from the Bush administration. That's like scoring a perfect 10 in my book. Like, give me media articles like that all day that just directly support, with a source of impeccable authority that they can't argue against because it's their source. That proves exactly what I'm saying. Thank you, Politico. Thank you. Does that mean that USAID just psyoped me? Now I'm totally confused on how to take that. I think I've adjusted for the inversion, although you can never be too sure. All right, so where are we now? So once again, U.S. media totally funded, or not totally funded, but let's be accurate with our language. I always have to remind myself. Many media organizations are funded in part by USAID, which is supposedly U.S. taxpayer money, but is really just regime fiat currency printed and valued on the back of American blood and labor. They're all getting that money from the U.S. government. You have to assume that it's to do the U.S. government's bidding. But of course, the U.S. government's bidding is the Uniparty's bidding. It is only the global regime's bidding. And all of this works in concert. The whole point is to understand the system, and that the system works together, and that you can understand the elements of the system. And I actually kind of want to take a second and see if I can find this video that I did a while back. And it would just be the audio, but on the podcast as it was, it's not a conspiracy, it's a system. That would be the episode. You can find that on Rumble, and I'm sure you can find it on Substack as well. And then there's a short clip called "The Structure is Visible," if I'm not mistaken. And I'm going to pop these. Yeah, this is the one. I'm going to pop this. Actually, I'm going to drop myself out of the stream for a second and take a water break. And I'm going to play this, and then I'll be right back, and I'll drop the stream. I'll drop the link in the stream, I should say. Restoring classic MGs. They're these little British sports cars. He's always had one. His main one was a 1963 MGB, and he was rebuilding that car in little stages whenever he got the money and the time, as I was growing up, and probably did that for a couple of decades. And now he's gotten a couple more and is slowly rebuilding those as well. But back in 1963, these sports cars were not nearly as complicated, according to him, as the cars now. I'm sure they were complicated and complex in different ways. But my point is that what he was doing was taking apart a very complex system down to all of its individual component parts, and eventually replacing the parts that were old, fixing the parts that could be fixed, purchasing some new parts, and then putting that whole thing back together so that it works as it was originally constructed to work. Now, I couldn't do that, certainly not with the knowledge I possess now. If you gave me one and made it my life's mission to figure out how to do that, maybe I could. But I don't know how that system works, and I also don't understand all of its component parts. So there's a very small likelihood that I would be able to take this MG totally disassembled and be able to map how it all works and put it all back together correctly. Certainly not without outside resources, instruction booklets, books on how cars work. In this day and age, I could watch YouTube videos about how to repair and replace each individual part. I could learn the process, and through learning that process, I would better understand the overall system. But my dad doesn't need to do that. He can take the car apart and put it back together because he understands that whole system already. And what we are commonly faced with now from the sorts of people who voted for Joe Biden is an ignorance of how these larger systems function. And because of that ignorance, they will accept the story from authorities about what that system is actually doing, what all the component parts are and what they mean. And the primary message that we receive is that all of this is too complex for you to understand. Therefore, simply ignore it. Trust us. We've got it. And the truth is, all of this stuff is going to bore you. Some of it might make you angry. Either way, you're going to spend way too much of your time trying to figure out this system, and you're never going to get it. So just trust us. It's too big. You can't map it all, and you certainly can't, prove any of it. And eventually we come to embody the idea that complex systems are too complex for us to understand. So we need to defer to someone else who already knows the system. And that person can just tell us why we're wrong when we think something might be amiss. But my dad's not a mechanic. He can still figure out and has figured out how to take apart a 1963 MGB and put it back together. I don't think that he could do that with a Prius or a Ferrari. But I also understand that if we were both trying to figure out how to take apart and put back together a Prius or a Ferrari, he would be starting at an advanced position because he understands a sort of prerequisite or precursor to the design of the system that is now in place in these more advanced and more complex vehicles. We are told that we can't possibly understand the intricacies of epidemiology or virology or finance or any complex subject that has a profound effect on the world. You need to be an expert to understand why lockdowns work, even though they don't, or why masks work, even though they don't, or why arguing about borders is racist. But I don't trust some critical race theorist or a gender studies major to be able to put back together my dad's 1963 MGB. In fact, you don't even need to be a mechanic to do that. You just have to understand the system and how the parts work with all the other parts. And for something like car repair, to borrow a phrase from the fake president the other day, the proof of the pudding is in the eating. And of course, what I mean is the proof of the understanding of the system is that when you put it together that way, it works. You don't even have to know each and every part of the system to know that the system works when it's put together that way. You don't have to understand how the particles of exhaust function when they go out into the sky to understand that you've put the exhaust system together correctly. And so if a mechanic or my father says, this is how the exhaust system for a 1963 MGB is put together, they're going to be right. What we have now is people who want to assume that it's wrong, so they ask irrelevant questions and then force you to prove beyond a shadow of a doubt that you know each and everything about every single aspect. Because if you don't, then suddenly the system becomes something entirely different. It's totally opaque and unknowable. But they already have at least a passive understanding that this is actually how things work. And yeah, it's weird hearing clips that are like 3 years old, but I still stand totally behind that. If once you can see the system and you know what the system is designed to produce, and you can watch the system produce the thing it's designed to produce, well, then you have a pretty good indication that that's actually a system. And these parts are supposed to function together. Now, you could say that this is just all kind of the miracle of life or the miracle of God, that all of these things that would seem to be totally improbable just happen to work at the same time in this certain way to produce whatever it is that we can't even understand because it's so big and so far above our human nature to know these things. But when you see the system working together, you know that the people behind the system want it to produce certain results that you can see it producing, you should assume that it was set up that way rather than having to prove that each part is a certainty in the way that the child brains like things to be proved. So yesterday, let's get to, oh wait, one more story before we get to that. This one has to be dropped in here as well. I talked about the federal workers losing their jobs, and we talked about USAID being potentially defunded and people being asked to come home and told to freeze all their projects. The CIA has joined in and also sent buyout offers to their entire workforce. So who knows what that means for the future of the CIA? Maybe there are a designated small number of people, or maybe it's a large number, I don't know, who are staying on for whatever reason, but very interesting. The Central Intelligence Agency on Tuesday became the first major national security agency to offer so-called buyouts to its entire workforce. A CIA spokesperson and two other sources familiar with the offer said, part of President Trump's broad effort to shrink the federal government and shape it to his agenda. Now, if you're the CIA, if you're the Central Intelligence Organization, you should know whether or not Trump is actually bluffing on this stuff. I know that the federal employees, public sector unions, they think, or they at least tell their employees that Trump is bluffing, but shouldn't the CIA know? Like, isn't it their job to know this sort of thing? The offer, which tells federal employees that they can quit their jobs and receive roughly 8 months of pay and benefits, had up until Tuesday not been made available to most national security roles in an apparent cognizance of their critical function to the security of the nation. By the way, it's worth remembering that Caitlin Collins is the one reporting here, and she seems to be one of the stars of the television show, broadly speaking. We know that CNN was taken over a few years ago by John Malone and who knows who else. It's at least worth considering that CNN was flipped a long time ago. Caitlin Collins is everywhere all the time. She's like an anchor on CNN. She goes to all the offsite stuff. She's like the first string star of CNN at this point. And here she is talking about the CIA, probably her real bosses. And someone made this joke on X, formerly Twitter, today. Maybe I can find it quickly, but just noting how the media had been, how various media figures, I should say, have been resigning over the last couple of weeks. I think Jim Acosta's out, Andrea Mitchell's out, and there's one other one who I'm not thinking of. But you got to at least wonder, are these CIA assets within the media who are taking this buyout? How much of the media is going to disappear in the next few days? And again, it might be none of it. I don't mean to, quote unquote, date fag. This could be a total red herring. But otherwise, the Mockingbird media still exists. I don't think anybody questions that. Many of these people seem to have intelligence backgrounds or linkages. A lot of the time, they just put former intelligence officials, former defense officials, former law enforcement officials right on the air. I guess we'll see. Is CNN their side job? Still, even as the offer was sent to the entire workforce at the agency, it was not immediately clear whether all would be allowed to take it. Some specific occupations and areas of expertise appear likely to be restricted, one of the sources familiar with the offer said, suggesting that the effort is far less sweeping than in civil service agencies that are not considered to be doing national security work. There's also a caveat for Ratcliffe to retain flexibility to work through the timing of officer departures in critical areas, according to another source familiar with the matter. And hey, maybe Caitlin Collins is the source familiar with the matter. The Office of Personnel Management had issued internal guidance last week that some officers at the Office of the Director of National Intelligence may be able to participate in the program, but not all positions at ODNI will necessarily be eligible. Now, that is particularly interesting right now, just because we are waiting on the confirmation process of No Name's daughter's best friend, Tulsi Gabbard, to see if she gets confirmed as ODNI. So is there some subtle hint there about what the status of that office will be? Maybe. Again, I expect to see most of the fantasy team at some point work themselves out of jobs if they ever take jobs in the first place. Okay, now let's go to Donald Trump in the White House yesterday. I said we would come back to that. Here we are. And of course, we are going to talk about Israel as well before we make our way out of here today. So Donald Trump signed a national security, presidential memorandum yesterday, NSPM 2. I have not, I don't think, seen NSPM 1. So I also, just to be clear, haven't looked, but that's the sort of thing that would end up on our radar because John Harold Patel Patriot has done so much work on the NSPMs over the years and tracking them. And some of them will be available publicly and some of them will not. So if there's an NSPM 2 under this Trump administration, it would be proper to assume there's an NSPM 1. I might as well now just check. I should have just checked rather than going through that whole explanation. Let me see here. But we will go to the fact sheet. No, it seems like in his presidential actions, what is listed on whitehouse.gov, NSPM 2 is the first one. Okay, so I'm not crazy. So this is the fact sheet here on the NSPM. The NSPM establishes that Iran should be denied a nuclear weapon and intercontinental ballistic missiles. Iran's terrorist network should be neutralized, and Iran's aggressive development of missiles as well as other asymmetric and conventional weapons capabilities should be countered. So no matter what, Iran can't have missiles. That was what Donald Trump wanted to be very clear about yesterday. Iran is not going to get nukes. They're not going to get intercontinental ballistic missiles. Because if Iran did get that stuff, narratively speaking, well, then they could present a much bigger threat to Israel, even though Israel has a narrative defense, the Iron Dome. Now there's stuff that's going to get through the Iron Dome, and we don't want Iran nuking anyone or shooting missiles at anyone. So they're just going to not be able to have these big kinds of weapons. And we will go to war to guarantee it. The NSPM directs the Secretary of the Treasury to impose maximum economic pressure on the government of Iran, including by sanctioning or imposing enforcement mechanisms on those acting in violation of existing sanctions. Now, I will draw your attention back to something that we discussed on Monday. And if you need a reminder, here it is, or might be. Here it is.
Brazil, in our hemisphere, largest country in the Western Hemisphere south of us, cut a trade deal with China. They're going to, from now on, do trade in their own currencies, get right around the dollar. They're creating a secondary economy in the world, totally independent of the United States. We won't have to talk about sanctions in 5 years because there'll be so many countries transacting in currencies other than the dollar that we won't have the ability to sanction them.
So Trump is addressing nukes and intercontinental ballistic missiles, which might as well be nonsense. Like you could replace that with any gibberish and it would be the same thing. He's talking about sanctions that are totally unworkable already. Rubio says in 5 years, maybe it's totally true in 5 years, but Iran is already aligned with Russia and China, which makes them aligned with the rest of the BRICS nations. And if we get rid of the global regime's international intelligence apparatus and their terrorist organizations, then we don't need to worry about this big threat coming from any of these countries. And I'm not trying to suggest that we are on the dawn of a new utopia, but we know directionally where we're headed. So knowing that you can't actually apply effective sanctions to this country, knowing that nukes are fake, knowing that they're not going to get or use the missiles against any of these other countries, how seriously should we take this as an actual rather than a narrative move? Now, a lot of people are going to be like, okay, well, I think that maybe is going a little bit too far. We know there are real threats in the world. And I get it. Maybe there are. The real threats in the world are presented by the global evil twin, which I don't think has control over Iran at this point. And they don't have control over much of anything right now, it seems, and we'll get further into that. The Treasury Secretary will also issue guidance for all relevant business sectors, including shipping, insurance, and port operators, about the risks to any person that knowingly violates U.S. sanctions with respect to Iran or Iranian terror proxy. Who knows who's still doing business in Iran of these transnational corporations and global organizations? We'll see how it goes. The Secretary of State will also modify or rescind existing sanctions waivers and cooperate with the Secretary of Treasury to implement a campaign aimed at driving Iran's oil exports to zero. The United States Permanent Representative to the UN will work with key allies to complete the snapback of international sanctions and restrictions on Iran. And then we are going to investigate, disrupt, and prosecute financial and logistical networks here in the United States via the Attorney General, and prosecute members of Iran-funded terrorist groups that have captured, harmed, or killed American citizens and seek their arrest and extradition to the U.S. Okay? From the NSPM, they're saying it fulfills the president's 2020 vow to contend with Iran's pernicious influence across the globe. He said, for far too long, all the way back to 1979 to be exact, nations have tolerated Iran's destructive and destabilizing behavior in the Middle East and beyond. Those days are over. Iran has been the leading sponsor of terrorism, and their pursuit of nuclear weapons threatens the civilized world. We will never let that happen. Now, he made that statement. So he's made these statements back in 2020. He said from this moment on, and now we're getting all those statements again, basically the same things being put into place. He is drawing attention specifically to 1979, and I'll just point this out in the actual NSPM. The Iranian government, including the IRGC, since its inception in 1979 as a revolutionary theocracy. Okay, so we would have to go back to the Iran hostage crisis, the overthrow of the nation, any color revolutions, any regime involvement, CIA involvement, and see whether or not we could tell that the replacement government from that point on in Iran up till recent times was operating for the benefit of the global good twin or global evil twin. Were they simply a CIA proxy state used as one of these kind of global terror states that they just control and they enrich whatever groups are on their side of the divide? They do business with those people, and then they use quote unquote extremist groups or terrorist groups or whatever else to destabilize the rest of society so that they can overthrow governments and get the whole of society on their side. And they just repeat that cycle everywhere they go. That would have to be settled before you could really have an opinion on what this means vis-a-vis Iran. Donald Trump said some really interesting things, as I said, in this White House exchange in the Oval Office yesterday. You know, he's now his thing, I guess, every couple of days he gets in there, signs some new executive orders, takes some questions from the press, continues to advance the narrative. He was in there yesterday talking about the Department of Education and how we know that's going to be taken down. Over the weekend, I think, or maybe sometime last week, days in advance of him doing it, he talked about putting tariffs on Europe. So he's made it clear that that's something we might see in the future. He seeds that narrative. It's going to come around and have a payoff probably in a few days, just like the Secretary of Education thing will, though we're not there yet. So Trump yesterday in the Oval Office.
It could have been solved, this thing. It just, if things went the way they should have, this would have been over long ago.
Pause one. If things went the way they should have, this all would have been over long ago. That's something that we can say in a much bigger context. Really understand what that means. If things had went a different way, this could have been over long ago. Donald Trump is always mid-negotiation. Okay, this is always a push and pull between good twin, evil twin. Evil twin now is just creating as much chaos as possible to attempt to get everybody back on the same page and make the people reject what Donald Trump is doing and what sovereign nationalists worldwide are doing. They need to get everybody back on the same page. How do they do that? How does Trump stop them from doing that? How does Trump accomplish that mission while allowing them to create a minimal amount of chaos in the world? Okay. And everything from that point is going to be from the point in 2020 where he kind of stepped back into the background. If we are right about devolution or something similar, and it seems we must be at this point, because he was able to make his way all the way back through, and we can see how much of this was already accomplished in advance. He didn't just solve the Panama crisis. He didn't just solve the Colombia thing or the Venezuela thing or the Mexico thing or the Canada thing. And hopefully we'll get some of that today, although likely not. These things aren't just being solved on the fly within the first 2.5 weeks of his presidency, nor since the quote unquote election in November. These things have been put in place for years and years, and now we are seeing them publicized. Is it possible to have made it all the way through that without something going on in the background to hold on to power in some significant way, or at least deny power from that false reality layer of the government? I would suggest that nothing else would be possible other than that. So knowing that, what we have from the regime side is an unwillingness to relent because they hope that they can get everybody back on the same page or somehow outlast Donald Trump until the wave of MAGA, this sovereign nationalist response in the world, subsides, or until they're able to implement their agenda of full technological control over the world before we get powerful enough, or more accurately, recognize the power that we have already attained. And people refuse to do that because the TV hasn't told them yet. The TV that is, again, still controlled by the global regime and its intelligence apparatus, as you can see with the USAID thing. Should we assume that no media on the quote unquote right is getting paid off in those similar ways? I would suggest they are. I would suggest it might be possible that the Tim Pool, Benny Johnson op from a few months ago was either to expose the fact that they are involved in a program just like this, or just create a template for it. Maybe they're perfectly lovely guys who just happen to be retarded. Either is possible. But the point is, if they were to relent earlier, being not as evil as they are evil. If they did not think that they would still have a chance to get through and get their agenda enacted rather than the other, because the people would side with them based on the incentive and punishment structure within the party of false decorum, within the economic and financial life, and the rest of it. Would the people just relent and side again with them, or will they relent to Donald Trump and MAGA and the people and sovereign nationalists and sovereign nationalist leaders worldwide. And they've chosen not to relent. So we continue. And as we continue, their situation progressively gets worse. They expect their situation to get better and for more people to agree with them, but it's not going that direction at all. More people are agreeing with Trump, which accelerates their ultimate downfall. And they're still not relenting. And so whatever effect that ultimately has out in the real world is sadly collateral damage in this ongoing push and pull. People will say, well, then Trump has to stop it immediately. That is an important moral question with grave consequences. And that's something we've been talking about for years while no one else thinks about it. And there's going to have to be a solution to that somewhere down the line, because people are going to have to reckon with the possibility that it didn't have to go this far. But it's also entirely possible that it still has to continue much further, because people are still too easily slipping back into the thing that everyone believes everyone has exited from. People haven't exited from it yet, especially if we still think that all the people on TV are our best friends telling us the truth about any of this. So it didn't have to last this long, but it did. Let's continue.
But it's not over.
How close do you think Iran is to developing a nuclear weapon?
I think they're close. I think they're close. They're too close. But again, you could go back 4 years. I would have said they would have had it during this intervening period. But they're pretty close, Peter.
And why?
So how close is Iran to getting a nuclear weapon? Well, they're very close. They're too close. They're too close for anybody's liking. Again, nuclear weapons, bullshit. Trump said on Andrew Schultz's podcast and then reiterated a couple of weeks ago that nuclear disarmament was on the near horizon with China and Russia. Okay. So we had this discussion on an episode a couple of weeks ago. I'm not going to go back into it, but let's not be ridiculous here. Iran is not close to getting a nuclear weapon while China, Russia, and the United States are close to denuclearizing, especially not while China and Russia are like the big brothers for Iran. That's just not even sensible. It's ridiculous. Okay. So he says that they are too close, but also that if you asked him a few years ago, he would have said then that they would have it by now because of this intervening period. What's he talking about? Let's continue.
Why is Iran happy to sign it if it's Iran and their proxies who have threatened to retaliate against you and your team by killing you guys for taking out Soleimani?
Well, they haven't done that, and that would be a terrible thing for them to do, not because of me. If they did that, they would be obliterated. That'd be the end. I've left instructions. If they do it, they get obliterated. They won't.
So he just asked, what would happen if Iran tries to assassinate you again? And you remember that the assassinations are supposedly being caused by Iran. So stupid. So stupid. What if they try to assassinate you again? Well, that would be very, very bad. They would get obliterated. I've left instructions. That's an incredible statement. And I think because of, and this is me. If you can't go there with me, all good. When you look at this through good twin, evil twin, Iran just serves as a placeholder the same way China does or Russia does. Our war is not with Iran, just like it's not with China, just like it's not with Russia, just like it's not with North Korea. Okay, it's not with any of these countries. You can forget about the name of the country. We are at war with the global evil twin everywhere it exists, which is basically every country. So is there a faction in China that is at war with Donald Trump and MAGA while being at war with the rest of the sovereign nationalist leaders around the world and the sovereign nationalist movements around the world, the people of the world? The answer is yes, of course. It exists in China. It exists in Russia. It exists in Iran. It exists in the UK. It exists in every one of our states here in the United States, right? So we are at war with that thing everywhere it exists. We're not at war with Iran. In Iran, the country, any sovereign nationalist faction there and the people of Iran are not trying to assassinate Donald Trump. So who is? There are people in the world that may well be trying to do that. And some of them may route through Iran, but it's not the whole country. And that's the point. And there is a group that we are actually at war with. And Donald Trump would know, of course, who actually tried to assassinate him. And so he's saying that if they did that, they would be absolutely destroyed immediately. I have left instructions. What does it mean that he has left instructions? Like he's got a kill switch? If they try to take me out, if they're successful at taking me out, all done for all of them? And then who's going to do it? Sounds like he's got a lot behind him. Sounds like, I mean, I've said many times he has the American people behind him. That's not the sort of thing you can just say as a president. That's not the sort of thing that Joe Biden or Barack Obama could ever say with any meaning or authenticity. It would be a joke if they said it. That's a very powerful statement. That suggests full military backing without a shadow of a doubt. That's really something. So a lot of devolution-y stuff in here, a lot of things speaking to Trump's power, which I believe is there is power beyond. We'll get into it as we go through.
Be anything left. And they shouldn't be able to do it. And Biden should have said that, but he never did. I don't know why, lack of intelligence, perhaps. But he never said it. If that happens to a leader or close to a leader, frankly, if you had other people involved also, you would call for total obliteration of a state that did it. That would include Iran.
All right. A lot of signal there. Let's continue. So let's get into some of the Israel-Gaza stuff. Trump had a meeting with Benjamin Netanyahu yesterday. And this Oval Office press conference / presidential action signing was prior to that meeting. Here are Trump's comments on Gaza and Netanyahu and what they're going to talk about.
Both sides mean a lot. I talk about that. I talk about the other side. I talk about everything.
What's your main message to him today during your meeting?
Well, I'm here to listen. He's here to see me, and I'm here to listen. So,
He's here to see me. I'm here to listen. So Netanyahu, the guy who supposedly owns Donald Trump, travels across the world to see Donald Trump, and Donald Trump doesn't even have a message for him. He's coming to see me. He has something he wants to tell me. I don't have anything I need to tell him. I'm good. That's awfully interesting. And I think that the meeting went in that direction. And I think that you'll see, I hope you agree. Not everybody does agree, but that's okay. That Donald Trump still has the upper hand here. But he just said straight up, I don't have any message. He's coming here to deliver a message to me. And I'll just rewind a bit so that we can hear the whole comment.
What's your main message to him today during your meeting?
Well, I'm here to listen. He's here to see me, and I'm here to listen. So,
will you continue to press?
At the right time, I'll give him my message.
President, will you continue to press for this idea that Jordan and Egypt take Palestinians from Gaza?
Yeah, I would like to see Jordan. I'd like to see Egypt take some look. The Gaza thing has not worked. It's never worked. And I feel very differently about Gaza than a lot of people. I think they should get a good, fresh, beautiful piece of land, and we get some people to put up the money to build it and make it nice and make it habitable and enjoyable and make it a home.
They don't want to leave, though. Palestinians say they don't want to leave.
I don't know how they could want to stay. It's a demolition site. It's a pure demolition site. If we could find the right piece of land or numerous pieces of land and build them some really nice places with plenty of money in the area, that's for sure. I think that would be a lot better than going back to Gaza, which has had just decades and decades of death.
Where would those pieces of land be?
Well, they could be in Jordan, and they could be in Egypt. They could be in other places. You could have more than two, more than one, but you could have more than two. And you'd have people living in a place that could be very beautiful and safe and nice. Gaza has been a disaster for decades.
Would the U.S. pay for that?
I don't think the UN would pay, but I think there's plenty of people that would in the area. They have a lot of money. They certainly have a lot of money. Some of the countries over there, they'd like to see it. I know that Saudi Arabia wants to see peace. I can see that. And many of the countries there, as far as I'm concerned, they all want peace. I think, maybe I'm wrong on this, but I think Iran would like to see peace too. They've had enough. Don't you think they've had enough?
But the leaders of Egypt and Jordan have said bluntly they have no interest in doing this.
Well, they may have said that, but a lot of people said things to me. They said they wouldn't take anybody back in Venezuela, and right now they're flying them right back into Venezuela. And a lot of people, and they're doing the right thing in Venezuela. The Panama Canal is an active discussion right now. They said things about that, and virtually everything that's been said has been incorrectly stated based on the result.
Would that amount to forcibly displacing those people from Gaza?
I don't think so. I think if they had the opportunity, they'd love them. If they had an alternative to get, they have no alternative right now. I mean, they're there because they have no alternative. What do they have? It is a big pile of rubble right now. I mean, have you seen the?
Okay, we're going to get back into some Trump comments on Israel and Gaza, but all that is so interesting. He said, I will give Netanyahu my message at the right time. He's saying that the people of Gaza should be put somewhere else, maybe Egypt, maybe Jordan. You'll remember that all foreign aid was cut a week or so ago, except to which countries? Israel, Egypt, and Jordan. So that's important. He's talking about Saudi Arabia getting involved. Saudi Arabia's sovereign wealth fund was mentioned just a couple of days ago. My good pal Burning Bright brought it to my attention that the sovereign wealth fund in Saudi Arabia was built on the back of the corruption investigations and the seizures from the deep state actors in Saudi Arabia and the Saudi Arabian royal family. And supposedly that sovereign wealth fund is in the range of $8 trillion. Trump was asked about who would want to develop it there, who would want to pay for that development. And he mentioned Saudi Arabia, which is just Mohammed bin Salman, which is Live Golf, and UFC and other dealings they've had together. We had the sword dance. I think that was in Saudi Arabia, and the orb. Donald Trump is a good friend of these leaders, while the global regime tried to destroy these leaders, tried to destroy Mohammed bin Salman with the whole Jamal Khashoggi thing. And so he might invest in this Gaza construction project. And again, Trump just said it's a demolition site. It looks like a demolition site, like it's just all rubble. We need to clear that rubble out so that we can build. It's a construction project. Let's continue. That was that. Okay. So this is from the press conference later in the evening. They did a joint press conference, Trump and Benjamin Netanyahu did. And so this is my friend, The Storm Has Arrived, 17, his ex-formerly Twitter, The Storm Redux, the redo with an X. Here we are.
Thank you, Mr. President, Mr. Prime Minister. You are talking tonight about the United States taking over a sovereign territory. What authority would allow you to do that? Are you talking about a permanent occupation there, redevelopment? And Mr. Prime Minister, do you see this idea as a way to expand the boundaries of Israel and to have a longer peace, even though the Israeli people know how important that land is to you and your citizens, just as the space is inherited by the Palestinians as well?
I do see a long-term ownership position, and I see it bringing great stability to that part of the Middle East and maybe the entire Middle East. And everybody I've spoken to, this was not a decision made lightly. Everybody I've spoken to loves the idea of the United States owning that piece of land, developing and creating thousands of jobs with something that will be magnificent in a really magnificent area that nobody would know. Nobody can look because all they see is death and destruction and rubble and demolished buildings falling all over. It's just a terrible sight. I've studied it. I've studied this very closely over a lot of months, and I've seen it from every different angle. And it's a very, very dangerous place to be. And it's only going to get worse. And I think this is an idea that's gotten tremendous, and I'm talking about from the highest level of leadership, gotten tremendous praise. And if the United States can help to bring stability and peace in the Middle East, we'll do that. Bibi?
Nice framing of that shot there, just Trump and the Rothschild Zionist flag. And that is what that flag is. Because Israel, of course, was formed as a Rothschild Zionist nation. And hey, are they real Jews? I don't know. So if you call it a Rothschild Zionist nation, anti-Zionist Jews would tell you that the project of Zionism is antithetical to their faith-based beliefs and the proper faith-based beliefs of that religion. So it's clear that there's a pro-Jewish anti-Zionist argument. So it can't be anti-Jewish to argue against Zionism. Certainly can't be to point out the history of the symbol on that flag. And that's what it is. And yes, I know it goes back further than that, but nonetheless, it was the Rothschild symbol that became the symbol of the Rothschild seized Zionist state. So he's talking about rebuilding here in the Gaza Strip. He wants the Palestinians moved to Egypt and Jordan. The borders of Egypt and Jordan would then potentially change in the future. And we're going to talk a little bit about that. We've talked about it on the podcast before. But first, let's go to MSNBC and watch Joy Reid freak out about this. Why would Joy Reid be freaking out about this? It's very strange, isn't it?
Nights in this business, when you have to leave open the possibility that you can still be surprised, I might even say stunned. I think this is one of those days. Donald Trump making news in the biggest possible way. I'm going to read you the quotes that I think are stunning to just about everyone who heard them today after a day of calling for the people of Gaza, who he numbered at 1.8 million, to be relocated out of the Gaza Strip. Today, Donald Trump said the following about the Palestinian people. They can instead occupy all of a beautiful area with homes and safety, and they can live out their lives in peace and harmony instead of having to go back and do it again. The U.S. will take over the Gaza Strip, and we will do it, and we will do a job with it, too. We'll own it and be responsible for dismantling all of the dangerous unexploded bombs and other weapons on the site, level the site, and get rid of the destroyed buildings. When he was pressed on whether or not he would be willing to use the military to accomplish the U.S. takeover of the Gaza Strip, he doubled down on that, said, we will do what's necessary. We'll do what's necessary. If it's necessary, we'll do that. We're going to take over the peace and we're going to develop it. He referred to the Gaza Strip as the Riviera of the Middle East. He said that world people will live in Gaza, including Palestinians and anyone else, I suppose, that wants to live in this new real estate development he proposed today. This was stunning. And this came in a press conference with Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, his first trip to the United States since he was labeled a war criminal by the International Criminal Court with arrest warrants issued. This is one of the few countries where Prime Minister Netanyahu can travel because the United States does not recognize the authority of the International Criminal Court, which rendered a judgment that genocide and apartheid had taken place inside of Israel, disregarding the war in Gaza. So this was their joint press conference following a bilateral meeting. A stunner by any definition of the word. I'm joined now by Vaughn Hilliard, White House correspondent.
Okay, we can drop out of the rest of their coverage. So Joy Reid is shocked and stunned. Donald Trump says it's going to be a nice future for all the people in that region, and maybe we'll finally have peace and harmony over there. And I guess that's apparently scary. The International Criminal Court, she's making the point that our boy Yuhu is not allowed to travel to many of these other nations because the ICC has a warrant out for his arrest for committing genocide or whatever. And then she says that they're totally disregarding the war in Gaza. Totally disregarding it. Okay, so she is shocked and stunned that what began with the paragliding go-kart incident has now become a construction project. And that construction project was planned and publicized prior to the paragliding go-kart incident. So we have this piece of land, some of the greatest beachfront property in the world, although it always looks like a wreck because there's just rubble everywhere whenever we see pictures of it. But still, I mean, it's like coastline, sandy beaches. Could be a beautiful place. And it goes from that. They have this construction project planned years ago that now they're talking about in public, and now the world is understanding. And in between, they have the paragliding go-kart incident that causes the war that leads to the demolition site where the construction project is. So the project that they planned before the paragliding go-kart incident is now going to go forward as a result of the paragliding go-kart incident, turning that whole region into a demolition site. Let's be clear that we can understand the chronology here and the logic. A construction project was planned. Now it's happening. And in between, a war started from the paragliding go-kart incident and caused the construction project. That's what we are being told by the television. And we are expected to believe that. And in response, we are expected to wear 2 masks in the car. Let's continue. Let's see exactly what the project is. And let me be very clear. I have no way of proving this to you. I just don't. You're going to have to make decisions for yourself. It could be that we were taken to the brink of world war with the paragliding go-kart incident, when paragliding go-karts flew over the most heavily secured border in all of human history and killed thousands of people and beheaded and baked human babies. And Bibi actually repeated those claims yesterday, which is amazing, because repeating those claims forces all the people who made those claims and believed those claims back then to do it over again, or else have to deal with the fact that Bibi, who they were defending back then for those insane claims, like Ben Shapiro, for instance, and Barry Weiss and everybody else who went on with the atrocity stories for months on end about how a never-ending war against anyone would be justified on the basis of the rapes and the murders and the burned babies and the beheaded babies, etc. All those people who went hook, line, and sinker on that narrative, Bibi brings it back up now. They're going to have to take accountability for that again, or say, oh no, we were wrong actually about all this. Now, most people will just avoid it completely, but that's pressure. That's really interesting narrative stuff right there. So at that site, this is from 2024, so obviously after the paragliding go-kart incident, Jerusalem Post, from crisis to prosperity, Netanyahu's vision for Gaza 2035 revealed online. There's been much debate about exactly what Israel's plans for a post-war Gaza would look like, because of course it's their choice, right? And this is Jerusalem Post. Again, documents from Prime Minister's office were published on Friday showing Israel's plan to revitalize the Gazan economy. The documents showed Netanyahu's attempt to bring about a lasting peace and reintegrate Gaza into the regional economy through large infrastructure and economic investment. The plan laid out the goal of rebuilding Gaza in order to moderate its politics. Now, a lot of people are very concerned that this is the greater Israel project, as has been described for decades. And maybe you're right. I can't promise you that that you're wrong and that I'm right, and that's not what this is. But if it's America and Saudi Arabia doing it, I'm not sure that it's going to be Israel in full control, certainly not Israel, the global proxy state. If there is a good twin in Israel, and I have suggested that there is countless times, and they are actually going to be in control of that landmass going forward, and that is what guarantees regional stability and peace, and maybe world stability and peace. It's hard to argue against it. Also, you know, the people alive making the decisions now weren't the people who made those decisions. And so everybody's just been born into what we're born into, trying to make the best of it. And so I don't know. I don't know what the right answer is what I'm saying. It called Gaza an Iranian outpost that sabotages emerging supply chains and thwarts any future hope for the Palestinian people. Emerging supply chains. Okay, well, supply chains, transportation routes are an important part of that. The plan also highlighted the historically central place that Gaza held in the east-west trade routes, being on both the Baghdad to Egypt trade routes and the Yemen to Europe trade routes. Okay. So once again, we're back at trade routes and choke points. And here's a bigger map regionally, planned infrastructure and trade routes from this plan. And this, by the way, this line right here, I'm not sure it says it in this article, but that is roughly the planned path of the Ben Gurion Canal, which would present an alternative to the Suez Canal. And the Suez Canal, we were just hearing about a minute ago, as one of those places that USAID always needs to have a mission, much like the Panama Canal, because this right here is how you get from Europe, the Mediterranean, to the Red Sea and out to the other side, to Asia, to the eastern side of Africa, whatever. And to all of the Middle East, of course. So this plan has been around for a long time. Let me see if it says when this plan was created. But the Ben Gurion Canal, for instance, has been a planned project for many decades. So we have on one side the Greater Israel Project, and then on the other side, we have a totally rational system of new transportation routes that would present a competition, or at least take away a monopoly or a choke point on other transportation routes. Like if the regime has full control over the Suez Canal, then they can control the economy that depends on those transportation routes. If companies aren't going to go through the Suez, they have to go all the way around Africa and come back, which is much more expensive and takes a lot longer. Even in 2020 and 2021, we saw the problems with our ports here in the US. And I know a lot of people think that ships were kept offshore so that they could all be properly examined. Maybe that's totally right. But we have come to learn over the past few years the importance of these supply chains, access to trade routes, etc. That was part of the control mechanism of the global regime system for all this time. And to the extent that they have a monopoly on any of this, well, if you have another option that's built that takes away their monopoly, or at least the power of their share, you have dealt a serious blow. Now, if on one side of that canal, if Saudi Arabia and the United States are protecting stability around that canal, and Israel, Jordan, Egypt, and Palestine all have mutual interest in this canal being properly used and managed, and access being assigned in some agreed upon way. That seems like a major revelation in geopolitics. And it's entirely possible that Israel thought that they would have all the control over that project, that the project had advanced to this late stage and that it was their thing. We get to clean out these Palestinians. I'm not suggesting there's never been any violence. The regime creates violence and destabilization all the time. Polymathanon in the chat says Egypt is planning on a port, Taba port on the Gulf of Aqaba, which is another route that would be in competition to the Ben Gurion Canal as well as the Suez Canal. Well, wonderful. Or maybe we're used in conjunction with. So these are bigger things. And what ultimately matters is where the control of that is going to be. If Palestine has a state, and by the way, I brought this up on Perplexity yesterday and posted it, but might as well add it back here. Let me see. Where am I? Is my history no longer than this? Here we are. How many nations in the UN recognize Palestine as a nation? Because we're told that there's not going to be any sort of two-state solution, are we not? By many people, we're told there's not going to be a two-state solution. As of 2024, 146 out of 193 UN member states officially recognize Palestine as a sovereign state, representing approximately 75% of UN members. It excludes nations like the US, Canada, Australia, Japan, South Korea, and the majority of Western Europe. So basically just the British Commonwealth and American Empire don't agree, but the rest of the world agrees that there is already a Palestinian state. So we're being told that Trump is like giving away something to Israel, or that he's being mean by having Jordan and Egypt take on part of the responsibility. I would suggest to everybody that Jordan and Egypt have already done that. We've heard about some movement of people to those locations. There's probably going to be some portion of the Sinai Peninsula that is going to become Palestine. And I would suspect that the Gaza Strip will become some sort of independent city-state, like Singapore, which is only 2 times bigger than the Gaza Strip. It's not a big chunk of land, but it's an incredible location. And if all of this money is flooded in there to create something, maybe that's the solution. I don't know. It's probably a better solution to at least attempt, like make this an economic zone that becomes clear is not under the control of Israel, nor any terrorist organization or any regime-linked organization, I would think. That seems like a potentially hopeful possibility. I don't see any reason offhand to dismiss something like that. And I just also want to go to, this is the Times of Israel. I think I've pulled this up before, but the Ben Gurion Canal vision amidst upheaval. This also from even earlier in 2024. Okay. So the Gulf of Aqaba right here. And the canal would go through from the north end of the Gulf of Aqaba up and out through just north of Gaza, through basically Gaza into the Mediterranean. So is all of this a construction project? And again, the Ben Gurion has been, look at this, an ambitious vision conceived over 6 decades ago. Okay. Born in the aftermath of the Suez Crisis of 1956. The notion of the Ben Gurion Canal resurfaces today. Now, through all the research for hindsight 2020, you could see agreements being signed in 2020 between Israel and these other nations, the Abraham Accords, all of this stuff coming together to present this new possibility on how things will be. The construction projects were already planned then. The demolition site has been created by a war that was started with the paragliding go-karts, okay? And now the construction site just moves on. So on both ends, the construction site, in the middle, the potential of World War III after an event started by paragliding go-karts flying over the most secure border in the history of the world, slaughtering all sorts of people, and then being attacked in Gaza. These same terrorists or whatever were attacked in Gaza, the tunnels cleared out, etc. If there was some mission to clear out Gaza and the rest of it for this demolition site, for this construction project, okay. But I don't think that the situation requires that. So we shouldn't then give credence to the story of this war. And I know that that's really hard for people to get down with. And I do understand that. But if the global regime and the intelligence organizations, the global spy network that makes the regime's agenda work and implements it, runs the media worldwide and disseminates the central narrative from all of the authoritative sources that they control, if that's where our information comes from, and you could make anything look like anything with video and with actors and whatever else. And again, I'm not saying nothing real has happened. I'm saying that you could present a war with very limited skirmishes. You could present actual demolition sites as something that was blown out from missile strikes. And I would suggest that's what they're doing. And I would suggest it's what they were doing in Ukraine as well. And we just saw a construction project take shape in the Pacific Palisades, as unfortunate and sad as that is. And so that is my theory of the case when it comes to this Israel business. The idea that Trump is owned by the Zionist regime seems to make no sense to me whatsoever. Netanyahu seems fully under control. And a lot of people have presented the video of Netanyahu reacting to various things Trump says in that press conference. Take that as you will, okay? You can see those reactions in different ways, in my opinion. So it's not something I'd hang my hat on. But there have been continual color revolutions launched against Benjamin Netanyahu in the last few years in Israel. There have been attempts to arrest and imprison him for corruption, same way as Trump. They attempted to blame the paragliding go-kart incident on Netanyahu due to his advance notice. And hey, they called it Israel's 9/11. We should look back at that. And they tried to expand the Supreme Court in Israel to have full authority to get rid of him. They have also made him take people onto his war council and put people around him who were supposed to be driving the approach to this war. They were going to be playing the kind of uniparty right parallel on the controlled opposition, while the color revolutionists played the uniparty left side. We were going to see all of that play out. And Netanyahu was supposed to be eliminated. They were going to get him out of there, replace him with someone else so that their program could keep moving forward. They were going to do the same thing with Donald Trump. Get him out of there, replace him with someone else, whether it's J.D. Vance or Ron DeSantis or Nikki Haley or whoever is easily controllable, and will keep that agenda rolling because that's where the money is. That's where the incentive is. That was their version of the program. All that's gone. So they want to get rid of Netanyahu. And Trump says he's going to own this thing instead of Egypt, this long project that they've been developing for 6 decades. Trump's like, oh, I think I'll take that. And you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to share it with Mohammed bin Salman and the rest of these nations in the Middle East. And oh yeah, here's where the Palestinian state is going to be. And in the meantime, I'm going to put up a Trump hotel and casino and boardwalk. Maybe we'll have a Hard Rock Cafe here. Maybe we'll have, instead of a Statue of Liberty, we'll have a giant Donald Trump statue with the fight, fight, fight hand up, and we'll call that a Statue of Liberty. How about that? It's going to sit right off the bay, right off of Gaza. That's where the Donald Trump Statue of Liberty is going to be. That's not their project. That's my take on it. If you don't side with me, hey man, what can I do? People don't have to agree with me. That's how I see it. I think that fits the set of facts. And I don't think that the situation as presented on television, the Trump is a pro-Zionist shill, I don't think any of that fits the set of facts. None of it. Doesn't make any sense. It doesn't reflect back to the story they told before. You can see them running the same narrative operation. It's not there. This is. And they've tried to take Bibi out for a long time, and it hasn't worked. And now Trump is doing business with him, and Bibi is saying that Trump is like the most significant figure that ever existed, certainly the best friend that Israel has ever had. And our boy Yuhu has done as good a job to tear down the false reality about the global regime proxy state of Israel as Joe Biden did here in exposing the corrupt administrative state and the deep state and the Democrat Party and all the rest of it. All right. We're going to leave it there. I will be back on Friday for the normal show. I was just trying to check the chat here. Polymath gifted a subscription, and I think that's it. I will be back on, another subscription from Sandra M. Carter. Thank you all very much for your support. Thank you for your regular support as paid Substack subscribers. I will be back on Friday at the same reasonable time on the same reasonable podcast network. I don't have a network. Masks and lockdowns don't work. They lied to you about a pandemic, and Joe Biden will never be president and never was.
Well, what?
You know who I am, don't you?
Well, you ain't Fiona Apple, and if you ain't Fiona Apple, I don't give a rat's ass.
Ah!
And what's wrong with being an angry prophet denouncing the hypocrisies of our times? What do you think, Max?
Do you want to be an angry prophet denouncing the hypocrisies of our times?
Yeah, I think I'd like to be an angry prophet denouncing the hypocrisies of our times.
It's not true. It's more true than I would perhaps prefer.
Down. We do a little trolling. It's called We Do a Little Trolling. What?
In my mind, that's the end game.
If you're listening for free and would like to support the show, the best way to do that is by signing up for a paid subscription at imyourmoderator.substack.com. You can find the info stream over on Telegram at t.me/veryreasonable. The merch site is cancelcouture.com. And for all my other links, you can visit linktree.com/imyourmoderator. And I'll see you soon. Down on the range.